Colin Kelly's story of bravery during the first bombing missions in the Pacific flourished at a time when nearly all war news was grim. In America's first days of war, the defenders of the Philippine Islands were pushed into a precarious situation. With much of the U.S. Navy's battleship fleet smoldering at Pearl Harbor, it was up to a handful of depleted Army air units to attempt to counter the scores of Japanese vessels massing off Luzon to support an invasion. Captain Colin Purdy Kelly, Jr. and his crew had made it through the initial Japanese air attacks, but many of the 19th Bombardment Group's B-17 bombers were not so lucky. Kelly and other pilots and crews began flying combat missions with surviving aircraft almost immediately. On December 10, 1941, Kelly and his men were aloft, searching for enemy warships to the north. Due to the continuous threat of Japanese aerial intruders, their B-17C Flying Fortress was partially fueled, and the harried ground crews at Clark had only managed to scrounge up 3 600-pound bombs for Kelly's sortie against what they thought was the Japanese battleship Haruna. Despite their limited bomb load, Kelly and his men dutifully attacked the vessel, which was actually the Japanese light cruiser Notori, from 20,000 feet, scoring a near miss that damaged the ship. While returning to Clark Field, Kelly's plane was spotted by patrolling Japanese aviators. They quickly pounced upon the lumbering American bomber and, in repeated firing runs, raked the aircraft with machine gun and cannon fire. Kelly's B-17 began to burn. As aircraft commander, Kelly's actions that day were the same as many others would be in the years of combat flying to come. He put the lives of his crew ahead of his own safety. Giving the order to bail out, Kelly stayed on the flight deck, struggling to hold his dying aircraft level so his men had the chance to jump. Nearly all of his crew parachuted from a stricken bomber before it exploded in midair. Kelly's body was found very near the wreckage with his parachute unopened, a 5th Bomber Command report later stated. The personal courage and zealous devotion to duty displayed by Captain Kelly on this occasion, at the cost of his life, have upheld the highest traditions of the military service and reflect great credit upon himself, the Far East Air Force, and the United States Army Air Forces, reads his Distinguished Service Cross Commendation. Kelly's death and military honors, however, are just part of the story. Kelly's legend on the home front also proved to be long-lasting at a time when war news was almost exclusively grisly and gloomy. Kelly's story of selfless sacrifice profoundly affected the American public. For years after Kelly's death, citizens all over the country continued to commemorate the late aviator so that the story of his bravery would never be forgotten. Streets, drives, and avenues named for Colin Kelly grace road maps in towns and cities nationwide. They endure in Texas, Florida, California, Maine, South Carolina, and New Jersey, to name a few, along with the Colin Kelly Sick Drive near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. In Kelly's hometown of Madison, Florida, there is a Colin Kelly Highway, a Captain Colin P. Kelly Jr. Post Office, and an imposing monument topped with a quartet of angels, wings outstretched, dedicated to the pilot at the city's Four Freedoms Park. There is also a Colin P. Kelly Fitness and Wellness Center, which is just a stone's throw from the pilot's final resting place at Oak Ridge Cemetery. Other Americans immortalized Kelly in poems, paintings, and songs. In 1944, a book titled The Legend of Colin Kelly, America's First Hero of World War II, hit the shelves. The term is often used for Kelly, the first. His gravestone uses the phrase too, even though men like Doris Miller, Kenneth Taylor, George Welch, and others had demonstrated great bravery, and many Americans had died at Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, and elsewhere in the first days of war. The city of Eugene, Oregon boasts Kelly Middle School. The student body's nickname is the Pilots. And the school's colors? Kelly Green and White, of course. An elementary school in Compton, California, built in 1933, was renamed Colin P. Kelly Elementary to honor the late aviator. The school's logo has a climbing Boeing B-17 bomber at its center with the slogan, "Soaring to Academic Excellence." Strangely, there is no Air Force base named after Colin Kelly. This is most likely because U.S. Signal Corps flyer George Edward Maurice Kelly, killed in the crash of a Curtiss Model D in 1908, beat him in solemn tribute. Camp Kelly in San Antonio, Texas, was dedicated in 1917. It later became Kelly Field and then Kelly Air Force Base. The fact that the facility is named after George, not Colin, is a matter of timing. Though there was no air base, there was a ship named after the departed B-17 pilot. The Liberty ship SS Colin P. Kelly Jr. was launched on December 13, 1942. The Kelly traveled the world. A typewritten history of the ship in the National World War II Museum collection puts it, "We anchored at least once at every continent in the world. We sailed the Pacific, Indian, and Atlantic Oceans plus the Caribbean, Arabian, Red, and Mediterranean seas. That would just about be the 7 high seas. Wouldn't it?" It was off of Sicily that the Kelly saw the most action, fighting off attacking German aircraft. The history says, "Our ship's sick gunners have been credited with 6 or 7 planes, so Colin P. we have done our best to avenge you." The vessel survived the war, but while delivering food to Antwerp 3 weeks after the fighting in Europe ended, the Kelly hit a mine and was damaged beyond repair. The ship was subsequently scrapped. Not every memorial for Kelly was made in the United States. For years, a bust of the flyer stood near the runway at Clark Air Force Base, no more than 5 miles from where the aviator's body fell in 1941. When the base was transferred to the Philippine government in 1991, the bust was moved. Today it resides in a massive American cemetery and memorial in Manila. The site is the final resting place for 16,859 Americans and a memorial with the names of an additional 36,286 Americans who went missing in action. Unable to grieve for each life lost individually, American citizens found symbols of heroism, like young Captain Colin Kelly, Jr., to channel their nation's pride and also their sorrow. Colin Kelly's story of bravery and sacrifice remains one of the most remarkable tales from the early days of World War II, and his legacy as one of the war's first heroes continues to resonate. In a time when most war reports were filled with grim and tragic news, Kelly's actions stood out as a shining example of courage and selflessness. His story, which began during the early stages of the Pacific War, not only defined his own legacy, but also helped lift the spirits of an entire nation. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, the situation in the Pacific was dire. The attack on Pearl Harbor had decimated much of the U.S. Navy's battleship fleet, leaving the Philippines vulnerable to Japanese invasion. The defenders of the Philippine Islands, including the Army Air Forces, were outnumbered and outgunned. In these dark early days of the war, it fell to a handful of remaining American pilots to try and slow the tide of Japanese aggression. One of those pilots was Captain Colin Purdy Kelly, Jr., a member of the 19th Bombardment Group. Despite the overwhelming odds and a fleet of damaged aircraft, Kelly and his crew were among the first to take to the skies in combat. They flew missions almost immediately after the initial Japanese air attacks, determined to defend their positions and strike back against the Japanese forces. On December 10, 1941, Kelly and his crew set out on a mission to search for enemy warships. Their B-17C Flying Fortress, a strategic bomber capable of delivering heavy bomb loads, was partially fueled, and the ground crews at Clark Field, where they were based, could only provide them with a minimal bomb load, 3 600-pound bombs. The target of their mission was believed to be the Japanese battleship Haruna, but they actually encountered the Japanese light cruiser Notori. Despite the limited payload, Kelly led his crew in a bombing run from 20,000 feet, releasing their bombs on the target. While the attack didn't score a direct hit, they did manage to inflict damage on the vessel. The mission, however, would soon take a deadly turn. As the crew made their way back to Clark Field, they were spotted by Japanese aircraft. The B-17, already a slow-moving and vulnerable target, was immediately attacked by enemy planes. In a series of harrowing passes, the Japanese aircraft raked Kelly's bomber with machine gun and cannon fire. The B-17 began to burn, and the situation grew increasingly desperate. In the face of almost certain death, Kelly's instincts as an officer and a leader took over. His first priority was the safety of his crew. Despite the flames engulfing his aircraft, Kelly remained at the controls, keeping the B-17 level long enough for his crew members to bail out. As the plane neared its final moments, nearly all of his crew parachuted to safety. Kelly, however, stayed with the aircraft, ensuring that his men had the chance to escape. His actions that day exemplified the highest ideals of military service, selflessness, courage, and a deep commitment to the men under his command. Tragically, Captain Kelly did not survive the ordeal. His body was discovered near the wreckage of his aircraft, his parachute unopened. A 5th Bomber Command report later noted the ultimate sacrifice Kelly made for his crew and his country, stating, "The personal courage and zealous devotion to duty displayed by Captain Kelly on this occasion, at the cost of his life, have upheld the highest traditions of the military service and reflect great credit upon himself, the Far East Air Force, and the United States Army Air Forces." Kelly's death, though tragic, only solidified his place in the annals of American history. His bravery came at a time when the war seemed almost unwinnable, and his story became a beacon of hope for the American public. As the war dragged on, and the news from the front lines was often bleak, Kelly's legacy of courage and sacrifice provided much-needed inspiration. In the years following Kelly's death, his memory was honored and celebrated across the United States. Streets, avenues, and even entire schools were named in his honor. In places like Texas, Florida, California, Maine, South Carolina, and New Jersey, people continue to commemorate Kelly's legacy. Perhaps the most poignant tribute can be found in his hometown of Madison, Florida, where there is a Colin Kelly Highway, a Captain Colin P. Kelly Jr. Post Office, and a monument dedicated to the aviator in the city's Four Freedoms Park. The monument, topped by a set of angelic figures with outstretched wings, serves as a reminder of Kelly's heroism.